Have you ever heard me on my podcast and thought, that seems easy, I should do that? Lots of MSPs have asked me for advice on setting up a podcast. And yes, having a podcast can be an insanely powerful marketing tool. But should you do one? Let me help you answer that question. And if you do get started, let me tell you about the specific things you need to consider before you get started. So Paul, should I do a podcast for my MSP? Well, my easy, flippant answer to this is probably not, no. Because unless you have a real passion for podcasts and you've always itched to do your own, you'll quickly find that a regular podcast is a total pain. However, the benefits are huge. I found that my podcast has been a key tool to reach people that I'd never have reached any other way. It's helped me set myself up as an authority figure. It's helped me to open doors to influential people by interviewing them. And it's helped me to build a brand new audience. Would you and I be talking right now, either you listening on the podcast or watching me on YouTube, if I wasn't doing this? So if you do fancy doing a podcast, these are the main 10 areas to consider. And the first is your target audience. Who are you going to do the podcast for? Now, this is easy if you operate in a specific vertical, but much harder if you just operate geographically. You have to really ask yourself, why would someone choose to listen to your podcast? What's in it for them? The second thing, and it kind of leads on from that, is the podcast title. And you need a unique title that will catch their attention. It also needs to be something that's not already being done. And remember, ordinary people, the business owners and managers that you want to reach, they're not as interested in technology as you are. So having a podcast about technology is probably not going to be interesting to the people you most want to reach, but they are interested in growing their business, increased productivity, and just having a smoother, better run business. Number 3 is regularity. So weekly gets people into the habit of listening. We've been doing it weekly since around about November 2019. But I'll be honest with you, it's a treadmill. It really is. I work several weeks ahead, so I never miss an episode, and that requires a lot of discipline. For example, right now, I'm recording this on a Tuesday morning. It's so sunny and beautiful outside. I want to be out in my shorts, working in the garden, but instead I'm in my studio and I'm recording the podcast because I need to do it now because my whole team is waiting for me to record that podcast so they can go and do the editing and the promotions and all the stuff they need to do. Discipline is a big thing with a podcast, and if you're going to do it weekly, you've got to work ahead and make sure it appears weekly. Number 4 is format. So lots of podcasts are just an interview with a guest, and that is a kind of an easy way to do a podcast. The downside is if your guest is a bit boring or the listener doesn't like the guest or their subject, they'll just skip the whole podcast, and that damages the principle of trying to get them to listen to you every single week. So the other way to do it is to have several segments to the show. That's what we do in our podcast. If you listen, you'll hear me. I do a talky bit, and then I do a tease for something, and then I do another talky bit and another tease, and then we have the guest on, and then we sort of finish with a listener question. And that's a pretty good format that's worked well for us for a number of years. Number 5 to think about is specific content. So what exactly are you going to talk about? It's worth having a content calendar to plan this, and mine stretches months into the future. So as I'm recording this, we're here on the 29th of April. You know that this is obviously going out in June, and we have a plan right up to September, October right now. The quickest way to lose motivation for your podcast is to be scratching around for content ideas. You've got to think ahead and make that systematic, knowing what you're going to be recording months in advance. Which brings us on to number 6, recording. You need a quality USB microphone. So I use a Shure MV7. It's quite difficult to say, although don't get too caught up on the technology. For years, I used a really old Samsung Meteor microphone. It must have been like 10, 15 years old, and that was fine enough until we upgraded, did the whole studio out, and decided to upgrade the equipment. And that was years into the podcast. Just as you can have the very best golf clubs and be a terrible golfer, you can have the very best microphone and produce awful content if you've got nothing to say. Make sure you do record somewhere quiet. You'll get great audio quality recording in a small cupboard, and I do mean that. A friend of mine does voiceovers for national radio, and he does it in his understairs cupboard with like a blanket just to kind of deaden the sound. Now, today I do mine in a large open space at home. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see my studio space, and it doesn't sound too bad because we've put acoustic tiles on the ceiling and on some of the walls as well. But if I had to start again and I didn't have this space, I'd just go in a small cupboard and I'd just use my microphone and just reduce the space, because you reduce the amount of boom that you can have if there's not so much space. Number 7 then is production or jingles. You know, when the guy that says on the podcast of, here's Paul Green's marketing podcast, something like that. You just get someone on Fiverr or Upwork to make this for you. There's so many people out there that will do voiceovers. So you can source your own, or you can just get someone who's got a good voice you love to do it for you, and then get someone else on Fiverr or Upwork to produce that, to turn that into a little jingle that you can play out. Just don't let anyone who does this for you try to charge you any kind of ongoing licensing fee, because that is nonsense. Pay once and own the work. Number 8 is editing. As with videos, really it's the editing that makes or breaks a podcast. We have 2 people that work on our production. We have James, who's our producer, and Simon, who's also our producer and our editor. And Simon sits and edits this just down to a level of perfection. He takes out all of my ums and ers. He'll get rid of my mistakes. He tightens it all up. He does a fantastic job. And when we first started, it was just me and James, and we just did a quick edit and got it out there. Now we spend a lot of time. We repurpose a lot of our podcast into YouTube, into other platforms. We cut it into shorts. We cut it into clips for LinkedIn. But all of that is stuff you do down the line. And we use Premiere Pro now because it's a fantastic tool where you've got a flow and you're repurposing content. But again, if I was starting again tomorrow, even if it was just me editing my podcast, I would start with something called Audacity. That's an open source audio editor. It's a really great piece of software. However, as quickly as I could, I would outsource the editing if I was starting again. So it takes my editor, Simon, around about 2 to 3 hours a week. He takes my recordings, my ramblings, and he turns them into a well-polished product. But please do not underestimate how important the editing is. The talking bits that I do, which takes me around about an hour a week, plus my interview, that's nothing compared to the time that Simon puts in making it perfect. So if you listen to the podcast or watch the videos and you think this is good, this is professional content, it's Simon that's doing all the heavy lifting on this. Thanks, Simon. Then we get on to number 9, which is hosting. So we use something called Castos, C-A-S-T-O-S, which automatically publishes the podcast to all of the major platforms. It's why we're on every single major podcast platform. And as a bonus, we can control and publish the podcast through our WordPress website, which is really easy. But that was a choice we made 6 years ago. And there are lots of hosts around. There are other hosts that are perhaps a bit more up to date. There are some, and I can't remember its name off the top of my head, but there's one which can dynamically insert adverts. So it can take all of your old podcast episodes and insert new adverts into your old podcast episodes. So it really is worth you checking out all of the major players. And you definitely want to get your podcast transcribed, as that becomes valuable content for your website. We don't use Castos' own automated transcription. We prefer Rev.com's human-checked transcription. So they do it on AI and then a human checks it. And the reason we do that is because we take that transcript and we use that to build our entire podcast page. So if you go onto MSPMarketingEdge.com and you have a look at the podcast, and you'll see for about the last 15, 20 weeks or so, which was when we last changed it, we have insanely good pages where the whole transcript is on the page. We pull out key quotes. We have links to things. We have other resources that appear in the page. That takes Laura, who's on my podcast team. It takes her a couple of hours a week to do, but it's worth it because we do see some good traffic coming into that. And then finally, number 10, it's the final item, and it's promotion. Now, this is the biggest question to answer. How will you promote your podcast to the audience that you want to reach? So here's what we do, or a little bit of what we do for ours. I've already mentioned a few things we do, like repurposing the content onto different platforms, but I send out a big email to my database every Tuesday. I post it in my Facebook group. That's my MSP Marketing Facebook group that's only for MSPs. We post it on LinkedIn. It actually goes across the week in 2 or 3 different ways. And for special episodes, we do sometimes run paid ads as well. One other thing that we do is we ask the guests to promote it to their audiences. So we'll only do that if they're guests from within the channel, because that's a sensible thing to do. But we do also invite on strategic guests. So people that I know are very well connected and will bring a lot of listeners onto the podcast. In fact, the pro tip on that one is go and find all the other podcasts that are big that you want to be on and invite the hosts of those onto your podcast. So they come onto your podcast, you do an interview with them, and inevitably during that interview, they will say to you, would you like to come on and be a guest on my podcast? So you actually promote your podcast by appearing on other people's podcasts. And as long as you're all reaching the same audience, that's a really great idea.
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Edge.